Hello YouTube, this is umils03. In the previous lesson, we talked about the do-while loop, and we basically talked about a fourth way to iterate through code. And we said that the essential difference between a traditional while loop and the do-while loop is that the traditional while loop will check its boolean before the loop body, but the do-while loop will certainly run the loop body at least once. It'll run it exactly once, and then it'll check the loop boolean. Okay, so that translates to being at least once, right? Because it runs exactly once and then it checks the boolean. Okay, so what we're going to do is in this lesson, I wanted to talk about file input and output, so file IO. And this is a pretty interesting topic, but what I wanted to do is essentially show you what's going on with this. So essentially what we're going to do is this is going to be kind of a bulky lesson, so I wanted to review basically formatted strings, but I want to do it pretty quickly. And I also want to review the do while loop, but I want to do it in the context of file IO since there's a lot to say about file IO. So, I mean, these are all my notes for the lesson today. This is all the new stuff to learn that we want to learn in the next 19 minutes. So essentially what we do is we remember a formatted string, and we said basically if we have System.out.printf, what we learned in lesson 45 just 2 lessons ago, is that we can have a formatted string where essentially we can space things out in a more aesthetically pleasing way rather than just concatenating one thing, left to right, one thing stacked after the next, with System.out.printf, we can specify these percent signs. And if we have percent %s, then that means that we're going to feed in a string, right? So you can see that there's a percent %s here and a percent %s here. So these last percent %s's would be in accordance with these two strings here, these last two arguments. And then this percent %f would mean basically formatting a float, okay? And so these other numbers that you see inside of the formatted string refer to spacing, okay? And so you can review lesson 45 for exactly how that works. But for example, if you say %20s, then that would give this string, the particular string that you're about to pass in, 20 characters of spacing. Okay, if the string is longer than 20 characters, it just spills over, so be it. But if it's shorter than 20 characters, if it's only 17 characters, then you would get 3 characters of free space, of blank space, and then the last 17 would be the word, okay, and that would fill up the 20 characters that you allotted for that string. Okay, and if you say %15.9f like this, basically what that means is that we're going to give the floating point number 15 characters of spacing and up to 9 characters of precision after the radix. So remember, if the floating point number doesn't even have 9, decimal points of precision, then if it only has 5, we'll just print 5. But if it has 12, we'll just print 9. So hopefully that's clear to you. And then integers work in a similar way. So we would just give an integer 10 characters of spacing. If the integer is 3,000, okay, that's 4 characters long, then it gets 6 blank spaces, and then you get the 3,000. So hopefully that's clear to you. And then if you add the \n, remember that's an escape sequence like we talked about earlier in the curriculum. And then we would add that to the end of a formatted string to make it work more like a formatted ln. Okay, and then we basically said a do while loop. I think we already reviewed that. So if we say do and then loop body while boolean, that's equivalent to doing the loop body and then saying while the boolean is true, do the loop body. Okay, so hopefully you can see how these are basically equivalent implementations, okay? When we talk about file input and output, basically our goal is to create, write to, and read files from Java. But basically what we're going to do is we're going to look essentially at the repository that I have here. So essentially if we go back to the YouTube tutorial. So this is a project that we created. This is a project that we created, a BlueJ project that we created, I think in lesson 1 at the very beginning of the curriculum. But we've been creating and stacking on all these classes since lesson 1. Okay, so almost none of these were here except maybe Hello World in lesson 1. But anyway, every time we create a class, there's going to be 3 files that are created. There's going to be a .class file, okay? And so basically that looks like this, okay? So it has like a coffee cup. And then you have a .ctxt, so that's like ctext, okay? It's a document. And then you also have a .java file. Okay, so that's your just another plain text document. And you can see there's basically a replication. There's basically three files, a .class, a .ctxt, and a .java for every time we create one of these classes. Okay, but what we're going to try to do is create a .txt. So we're going to create a text file, and I'm going to delete this little 5.txt because I actually don't know what that is. But our goal is going to be to use and construct a BlueJ, a Java program, which will create files, write to them, and then read from them. And I want to show you guys how you could do something like that. So what you're going to do is essentially the first thing that you need to do before you start creating and writing to and reading from text files. We're going to want a txt file to just show up here. Literally just a straight standard text file. You guys know, like a notepad, just a freaking basic .txt, basic text file that has text on it. Okay, and so the first thing that you need to do is import file, FileWriter, IOException, FileNotFoundException, and scanner. So you're going to import 5 important classes, and we've talked in depth about at least one of these, right? The scanner class. And so what do these 4 or 5 things allow you to do? Well, the file class allows us to create files. The FileWriter class is going to allow us to write to those files. The IOException class will divert the program to run properly if there's an input-output error. Remember, in lesson 44, we talked about exceptions, and that's why we wait and we hold off to until lesson 47 to talk about file IO, because it turns out that you can't have these input-output file mechanisms unless you can work with the IOException class. And then, of course, we're going to have a scanner class, because what I'm going to do in this program is ask the user to input what the name of the text file he or she wants to create is going to be. So that's step 1, and you can see I have 5 import statements all the way up here at the top of it. Remember, this is before the class is declared. This is at the very top of the class file. Okay, so you're just going to import these 5 things: java.io.file, java.io.FileWriter, java.io.IOException, java.io.FileNotFoundException, java.util.Scanner. Okay, and all of those have class APIs. They all have documentation, and you can go to Google and understand how all of them work. Right, so we've done this multiple times. We've done this for the scanner class, the math class, the integer class, the ArrayList class, and so you should be pretty comfortable looking up Java documentation on your own, learning about constructors, understanding how the constructors work, what kinds of methods are part of the class, what kinds of methods might be inherited from superclasses, right? So you can see that IOException has a lot of subclasses. You can see that there's a lot of subclasses, but not as many superclasses. But anyway, without dilly-dallying too long. So then what we're going to do, that's step 1, is to import those 5 classes. So hopefully you've done that at this point. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to scroll down, because what we're going to do is we're going to create an instance of the scanner class. And we talked about the scanner class previously, and we said that it can parse user input, for example. And so what we're going to do is we're going to say, let's create a file, and we're going to say pick a name with no spaces, and then the .txt is going to be appended onto whatever the user enters for what they want their file name to be. And so what we're going to do is we're going to try doing that. And then I want to walk you through the logic of what's going to happen. So after the user enters a file name, that's what happens here in these first 4 lines of code. And then we call this n method. And I suppose I haven't talked about that yet. It's very simple. What n does is it literally prints 2 new lines. Okay, it just prints 2 new clean lines. And I just wanted to have a compact way of doing that rather than saying System.out.print \n every time. Now I can just say n when I want to do that. So that's just going to print 2 clean lines. But what we're going to do is essentially the way that this works. What I want to say about this is after you use a scanner instance to ask the user to create a file with a particular name, we're going to instantiate, you are going to use a try catch block as discussed in lesson 44. And we're going to instantiate a file object with a string representing the name of the file to create. And it will show up in the same folder as the Java code that we have been writing. And then the createNewFile method is an instance boolean method that creates a new file and returns true if the file instance doesn't exist already. So what I'm going to do is scroll down here and show you what I mean by that. After we have a response string, which is the name of the text file that we want to try to create, we're going to say file f equals new file of response. Okay, and you can call these things whatever you want, but you're going to create an instance of the file class based on the string that the user entered with, any text file name that you want to call it. It can be based on the user or it can be a constant. Okay, and then we're going to say if f.createNewFile. So you're going to call the createNewFile function on the method on the file instance. Okay, and so once you do that, then hopefully we're going to be able to see it appear in the directory. So now what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and compile this, and I want to show you basically how this code is going to get started. So we're going to run the create file method, and it says what we expect it to say. So it says let's create a file, pick a name, no spaces. And so I'm just going to say something random, like September. Okay, and it says file created, September.txt. Go check your repository for September.txt. So now, if I go ahead and see a text file here, and you can see a blank text file. And I didn't have this ahead of time. This appeared now. I didn't pause the video or do anything clever. This just appeared right now, September.txt, because I instructed Java to go ahead and create a file with that name. Okay, so hopefully that's clear to you what happened with that and how the logic works for that. And so hopefully if you implement similar logic here and you follow the steps of this video, you'll be able to basically produce the same thing. Okay, and we instructed it, we said file created, and then we have the name of the file. So we instructed Java to say file created and then f.getName. And then it says down here, go check your repository for the file. And indeed we did, and we saw September.txt. So hopefully that's clear to you. So now that's good. That now we can go ahead and scroll up, and now basically in the short form, we've already talked about 4 out of the 10 steps. So we imported the 5 classes. We created a scanner instance to ask the user for a file name. We created a file object based on the file name and a try block. And also in a try block, we call the createNewFile method on the file object and verify that it shows up in the folder. What we have to do now is we have to go ahead and do another try catch block. So you have to see that whenever we're working with files, you have to put this kind of logic into try catch statements. Okay, and so maybe the tabbing and the indentation is not the prettiest here, but you can see that all this stuff is in try catch. So this try catch is just for creating the file. Okay, and so if there's an issue creating the file, we want to be able to call that out and prevent a runtime error. So hopefully that's clear to you. But now we're going to scroll down to another try catch block, and this one is a little bit more complicated. And so you can have a slightly simpler example in your case if you'd like. But what we need to do is that what we need to first do, this is going to be step 5 out of 10. We need to create a FileWriter object. So you need to create an instance of the FileWriter class. You can call it whatever you want. And the one thing that you put into the constructor, so the one thing that it accepts is the string, so the name of the file that you want to write to. And in that case, it would be response. Remember, it was just what the user inputted for what they wanted the file name to be, concatenated with .txt. And then we're going to ask the user how many words they want to write to the file name, to the particular file. And we're going to save the response to an integer. Remember, this is calling the .nextInt. It's calling the nextInt instance method of the scanner class. And we talked about that in lesson 18 or 19. And then we're just going to, if they say something like -12, we can just go ahead and convert it to 12. And then this is a review of the math, the app's static method of the math class, which accepts a number and returns the absolute value of the number. Just in case the user, enters -3, we can make it 3. And then we can go ahead and print 2 new lines. Remember the n method, and so you could either say n or fileIO.n because we're in the fileIO class, and that's where the n method is defined. And then if words is greater than 2,000, we can throw in a legal argument exception and say, sorry, that's too much for this program. Otherwise, if words is 0, we can say need to write at least 1 word. Okay, so hopefully they enter something between 1 and 2,000. And if they do, we're going to have a do-while loop here. So we talked about the do-while loop in the previous video, but we're going to ask the user to write a word to the file name. Remember, this is just the name of the text file. And then what we're going to do is we're going to basically we're going to keep up with a string. And this is going to be the string that we're going to write to the text file. And so it's just going to be whatever the user enters, whatever word that they want to enter to the text file. And then each time we're going to decrease the value of words by 1. What is words? Well, words was the number of words that the user wanted to enter. So every time we decrease it by 1, it's going to get closer and closer to 0. Okay, so if they said they wanted to enter 5 words, we're going to ask them for 5 words, and we're going to concatenate this write1 string with each of the 5 words that the user enters, as input. And then we're just going to go ahead and, enter a new line to the string that we're going to write to the text file. And that's what happens here. So the write1 string, that's the string that we're going to end up writing to the text file. So at the end, we say w.write of write1. So this calls the write method, and this is very important, and this is how you write text to a file. You call the write method on a FileWriter object, which we instantiated up here at the beginning of the try block. And then you need to go ahead and close the FileWriter instance. Okay, so let's go ahead and review those steps. So we said that you need to go ahead and, we need to go ahead and try. So you need to instantiate a FileWriter object with the string representing the name of the file. Okay, and then you need to say, for that FileWriter object, you need to say that object.write of x, okay, for some string x. And you can do something clever like a do-while loop. You can, use another scanner instance, ask the user how many words they want to enter, and then ask them for what those words are going to be. Okay, and then you need to go ahead and close. The FileWriter instance once you're done with it, and you put all of those into a try block, and you just catch an IO exception, so that if there's any issues with inputting or outputting, if there's any issues with writing to the file, we can go ahead and prevent a runtime error, and we can catch that ahead of time. So we're still actually running the same file as we had earlier. So remember, we created a text file called September, but it's blank and we haven't written anything to it. And so now what we're going to go ahead and do is I'm going to go ahead and say that we want to write 4 words to September, and we're going to say fall, and we're going to say Labor Day, just 1 word, and we're going to say, I don't know, basketball, and then we're going to say 1 more word. But before we do that, basically this is just parsing the user input. So this is the code that we already reviewed. And so now what we can do is we are writing to the file. And so now, I don't know if it's going to show up yet, but because basically the program hasn't finished running yet. But now I want to tell you about reading to the file. So we've already talked about 7 out of the 10 steps. We said that we have to import 5 essential Java classes. We need to create a scanner instance to ask the user for a file name, create a file object, create a new file, create a FileWriter object, write, close. Okay, so there's 3 more things to do. Now we need to create 1 more file object, and we're going to do this inside of a 3rd try-catch block. So remember, we've already talked about 2 try-catch blocks. One of them was for creating a file, and the second one was for writing stuff to that file. The 3rd try-catch block is right here. What you're going to do inside of it is create a new file object based on the string that the user specified was going to be the file name. And then you're going to create a scanner object. Usually we're accustomed to creating a scanner object based on System.in. This time the constructor, what the scanner object is going to accept when you create it is the file object that you created just previous to that. And then what you're going to do is you're going to say while t.hasNextLine, you're going to say System.out.println of t.nextLine. So what this is the architecture to check to see if another line can be read from the file. So what you need to do is you create a file object, you create a scanner object based on the file object, you say while that scanner object has the next line, print the next line. Okay, and so this is the procedure that you would read text from a file. You take text that already exists somewhere in a text file and you want it to go onto the console. Okay, and so this is how you do it. This is called reading a text file. Okay, and it needs to happen in the context of a try-catch block. Okay, and so this is the entire procedure, and the code got pretty long, but hopefully by going back and forth between the procedure and by looking at the steps here, the 10 steps, and by internalizing them and working on them on your own and seeing the code that I wrote for each of those 10 steps, you can understand what's going on here. So we're still running the same code. Remember, we created the text file. That was sort of part 1, and then we're going to add 4 words to it. That was sort of part 2. So now we're going to go ahead and add the 4th word. And then this was the part where it read from the file. So we said that we wanted to go ahead and have those things printed to the console. And indeed, if you go look at the text file, indeed the text shows up there too. So that's called file input and output in Java. And hopefully that was interesting for you to see. It's a lot of new content, but it's kind of exciting. And yeah, from UMills03, thanks for watching and please subscribe.